Hey guys, we'll just give it a couple more minutes, see who pops on, and then we'll start. Brendan, I like your attic. Looks nice up there. Nice office.
Welcome to my bedroom.
Skylights, fancy.
Oh yeah, yep.
Ryan, I worked with your wife at Four Seasons.
Oh, Meg, hey, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you? She told me
Good.
that you were, and I was like, oh, I'm never in the office, so I don't get to see people or
Yeah.
really meet anybody. So I'm glad
know.
I got to meet you virtually, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, COVID sucks. So the energy, that's what makes up some of the great things about the company, is sucked out, especially if you're just starting. It's almost a terrible time. I've gotten like 4 or 5 calls recently from friends or friends of friends who want to get into the industry and just want to pick my brain a little bit about it. And then just kind of like, here's the good and the bad, you know? Most people just think of the good, you know? So how's it been for you so far? Meg, are you frozen? Am I frozen? There's that home Wi-Fi getting you again. We'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll start. Do you guys, I guess we'll just start slowly, I guess. Is there anything specific that you guys, obviously we'll talk about distressed properties and how to find them and all the little details of that and tear downs, and if you're working with developers or if you're looking at for yourself for investments, or you guys have any specific questions that you kind of came today that you want answered, or just wanted to kind of get a check on the pulse of what you guys were really looking for?
Yeah, I guess I've been looking at learning more about how to flip homes and things like that. And
Okay.
I just read a book about it, and I was gonna see if I could implement something in the next few months. So this seems really interesting. It's kind of like how to find them, and it's very important. And I got a list of GCs from a lender that does renovations.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of just putting the framework together very slowly so far.
Well, good for you, Jesse. What's the book that you read?
It's Flip Your Future, and then I have another one that's like a very thick book. It's like Flipping for Dummies. It looks like it's just it's a big book, and it's got a ton of info in it. So so I got a long ways to go to kind of like start implementing things, but it seems like you can get money from anyone just about to, or from a lot of different resources to finance it. And it's just a matter of kind of, the difficult thing seems to be to find them. And from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think the golden rule has definitely always been finding the money is easy, is finding the right project is the hard,
Yeah.
hard. Okay, we'll definitely get into that. I've flipped a few properties and I've represented a lot of flippers over the years. Before the recession, all I did really primarily was work with flippers and developers. So my background really, I was an option trader for my early 20s, and then worked for a REIT. I was like a development analyst. So all I did was crunch pro formas and package deals for them for like a $4 billion company here in the Midwest called First Industrial. It specialized in industrial development. So they would more or less find land and we develop it and then sling it to Maytag or Whirlpool and say, hey, we'll build you $1 million or a 1 million square foot distribution center. And so I more or less worked for a big developer.
Mm-hmm.
And then, got swindled in becoming a realtor by my cousin, who was a big time investor and realtor. He still is with that properties. And I've been doing that ever since more or less 2004. So in between 2004 and the recession, I worked for about 3 or 4 developers, and all they did was flip single family houses, apartment buildings into condos, new construction, ground up, and learned a ton from them. And then I've just, in the last 3 years, have done a couple conversions of my own, some new construction, and just kind of, I've wholesaled a few properties as well. Got them cheap and then sold them. Found a buyer before they ever went to the market, and literally just made money on. Literally, I didn't put up any money besides some earnest money, and then was able to close on the same day and pocket a bunch. So there's definitely ways you can make money that route. So anybody else? So I got Jesse's kind of, he wants to turn into a big flipper, which I love. Ladies, Meg, Kat.
So my goal is to purchase an investment property every year. And I come from a property management background, so to self-manage and hold those properties.
Okay.
And then I've had a few clients that I've worked with that are interested in doing the same. So kind of figuring out like how to work with driving for dollars, I guess, and finding the deals.
Yeah. Okay. We could talk a little bit about that today.
I've never done a foreclosure deal or a short sale at this time. I'm just wrapping up my first full year.
Okay. Awesome. Congrats. There's a great agent. Her name is Joanne Numerowski. I can make an intro if you like. She's in her 50s now, but I used to work with her at Berkshire Hathaway and Keening and Strait. She had a policy where she would buy a property every year and she would put them on 15-year notes. She started when she was 32, I think, or 30, right around that age. So by the time she, hit about 45, they started paying off completely. So I can make an intro. She'd be a great person to talk with. And she's done it, and she'd be happy to talk with you. So
that would be great. I know once you hit 10, financing can be difficult. Right now, I'm only at 3 doors, so I'm very early into everything. But
yeah, and
I'm interested in.
she'd buy condos, she would buy multifamilies, single families, whatever was a good deal. So I think a lot of times we think of, we should just buy multifamily, but I'm not the biggest fan of condos as investments, just because of the association fees, management fees. They're included in that. They generally don't pay off, or they eat up 30-40% of your income, in the long run. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, but she would get great deals and it would make sense. Sometimes you could flip those. All right. So let's start with distressed properties. What I was generally taught when I first started, so from my family, they would literally have me go around in 2004, 2005. They'd literally make me walk around Bucktown and Wicker Park and knock on doors, right? And the way they always used to tell me, it's kind of like you talked about driving for dollars, but I walked for dollars. I more or less would get dropped off at 1, and then 2 hours later, he would pick me up, right? And the goal was ultimately to look and find any property that has probably outlived its lifespan, right? Any properties that look kind of, not delinquent, but like neglected, So one of the things that I always looked for, are the windows older? Do they have metal windows, right? Obviously, if there's any, common sense stuff here, overgrown landscaping. If you're doing it in the winter, do they have, I found over the years that sometimes older people won't take out their window AC units. So they literally in the winter still have their window units in. That's because either they're too lazy or they're too old or they just don't want to bother with it. They don't care if their house leaks. There's no lights on at night. A lot of times people always think you should drive around during the day. But one of the things that I used to find is that if I drove around at night and I'm consistent about it, and I found out, like, if I found an older house and I was kind of like, I was curious about it, I didn't know, I'd try to look up who the owner was, try to knock on the door during the day, but nobody would answer. I'd go back at night consistently and see if anyone lived there, right? Or consistently saw if, they left the lights, if there's no lights on at night. Uncollected mail. About 4 or 5 years ago, there was a property in Lincoln Square where I noticed it was on Damon. I don't remember exactly. It was just like south of Leland, so south of Lawrence, probably like 3 or 4 blocks on Damon. And I kept driving by this property just on my way home. And, you know, quite often as realtors or investors, we sometimes let our fear of rejection get in the way of actually going out and, you know, making, like doing what we say we want to do, which is find deals. And so I noticed that this house, the mail would just pile up for days and days and days. And so finally I knocked on the door. Nobody answered, but then I was consistent. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to just do this. And that guy, I ended up getting probably by the 4th or 5th time I knocked on the door, he answered, and we had a great little conversation. You know, eventually I get him to sell. I pair it up to a developer, and he ends up turning it in the property into 3 townhomes. I was able to sell all 3 townhomes. So now if I was a little bit, if I ran into that situation today, I would actually just build those myself, right? Because I have the wherewithal and the confidence to do it. But you're going to get to a place where either you could go and search for those investors or those builders and you could just get the sale, or if you really have the gumption and you want to take on the risk, which is there's a lot of management when you're actually developing, but then just go out and get the money. Really just depends. So Jesse wants to start flipping properties. So that for that particular example, Jesse might go and say, all right, I've identified this property, you know, and for particular Jesse, he would have to figure out, you know, we'd have to look at zoning, right? You have to look at the lot size. You have to figure out what can you build on the property. Then you have to try to, you know, make a connection with either a general contractor or an architect to kind of give you some insight on what can be done. We could also have a conversation outside of this about how I identify properties, which we'll get into a little bit during the teardowns. But figuring out what are the next steps. Once you think you've identified a property, what are the next steps to try to figure out, is this something I should pursue, or is this just a waste of my time? And I've wasted a lot of my time over the years. Because I've done the due diligence and realized like, oh, there's only $100,000 worth of potential profit here. I'm not going to find anybody to take on that risk, right? Because there's not enough money. But you have to do enough of those to build up that muscle of how to identify, evaluate, and get there. So back to distressed properties. So I generally have for years, and I've even had people on my team do it in the past, where you literally just drive around and you look at which properties you write down the address, and then after the day you go back to your computer and you start looking, try to find out who the owners are. A lot of times I found luck if those owners are actually out of state, they generally are more willing to sell or maybe more motivated, right? The harder part is trying to actually identify the real owner, right? That's where I think there's nothing that works better. If I give you anything from today, is it's always worth it to get out of your car and knock on the door, and not just do it once. Once you identify a property, write it down and just, you know, I don't know, you put a little Post-it in your car, whatever it is, and you just keep going back to that house. You know, I just missed out on an opportunity on Racine and just north of Belmont, where there's an old house, and I was just driving. I've knocked on the door 3 or 4 times. I could see there was an old lady in the house. I saw her walker, right? And one day I was driving by and I saw a car parked out front and the gate was open. And I was on my way to an appointment. I pulled over, and the lady was carrying, it was the old lady's daughter, and she was in her late 50s probably. And I just said, hey, she was carrying groceries. I more or less just said, hey, I'm a neighbor. You know, can I help you with your groceries? She's like, sure, I guess. You seem like not a, you know, crazy dude. So I carry in groceries. Next thing I know, I'm in their house on their couch, having tea with them, talking about their property, talking about, you know, why I want to purchase it. And we had this conversation. I ended up losing out on that property because I didn't do a good job after a couple conversations. I followed up with them. They weren't ready yet. A year goes by and I dropped the ball, but at least through that consistency, knocking on the door, just being there, I created that opportunity. Next thing I know, I'm in the house, right? So nothing works better than actually knocking on the door, right? And worst case scenario, they're just going to say no, beat it, right? But at the end of the day, if you're there with a smile and you just kind of say, hey, are you open to the possibilities of selling in the near future? I generally like to always say, I'm looking for a property, right? I don't want to say I work with investors, I do this, because a lot of times they don't know if you're serious, but if you're the one saying I'm the buyer, right? Then they'll be like, oh, I'm actually talking to the boss, or I'm talking to the person who makes the final decision. Whether you do that or not, that's up to you. Whether you are that buyer and you raise money for it, or if you're just trying to get development deals. One other things, for neglected properties, or just distressed properties, is do you guys ever look up taxes, like tax delinquency? You guys ever try that before? So right now there's a moratorium on it. They're not actually, if anyone's late on their taxes right now, as you know, there's no evictions happening right now. There's no foreclosures. They've stopped those, a moratorium in Illinois, and they've also stopped tax sales. But tax sales is another great way where you could go into the Cook County's cookcountyclerk.com, I believe is the website. And there you could literally find out who's delinquent. Then you go on Google Maps. Once you find out the PIN number and the address, you could figure that out, find the address, Google it. And if that's a property you think you want to pursue, then you go and drive to it. The thing with finding distressed properties is it does take a lot of time, right? It is a time suck for sure. But some of the biggest agents I know, whether you're going to do it for yourself or if you just want to build a clientele of investors and developers, is it takes time. But the more properties you find off market, the more times you go to these developers or these investors, the more they're going to take you serious. I had a unbelievable opportunity probably 3-4 years ago where just from sending mailings, a tenant reached out to me because he found out that the building was going up for sale, or the seller wanted to sell it. The tenant reached out to me. I then got a hold of the owner, and lo and behold, he was selling 9 properties in Avondale. I then reached out to a hedge fund, and we put in a bid for like $3.5 million for 9 properties. But through just doing the due diligence, and being persistent, I have a couple people who literally send out mailings. So when you identify a property that you think has potential, you just continue to mail that property. You set them up, and then you just hit them every quarter asking if they want to sell, right? And there are a lot of investors in the city who literally just have hundreds and hundreds of addresses that they've identified, and they're constantly mailing. But what I tell you, going back to this, the guys I know, they don't ever knock on the door, right? For people who are smaller like us, it makes sense to go and knock on the door. So knocking on doors, tax records, finding properties with like delinquent mortgages. It's a little hard to do that. The one way you could do it. So are you guys familiar with the difference between a short sale and a foreclosure? Right? A short sale is more or less just a pre-foreclosure. Is that yes, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Once obviously, a property is delinquent, you can check with the county. Once the attorney for the bank files a lis pending, right? They generally also have to put that in a newspaper, right? So that's a lot of ways. Like during the recession, when I was trying to find a lot of distressed properties, I was constantly looking up law journals and constantly looking in the paper every single day because they had to post it per law. So one other good way to try to figure things out is to build relationships and look, and this is what I need to do myself a little bit better. I did this a little during the recession, but try to build relationships with asset managers, right? So these asset managers are the guys who more or less banks come to them and say, hey, here we have these 70 properties that we've recently foreclosed on, help us sell them. And so then these asset managers, what they generally do, they go to first is they go to wholesalers, right? A lot of times. So, but one way to do that is you could literally call up these asset management companies, and you could find out who those asset management companies are is by looking at foreclosure properties and seeing who's actually managing those, right? And then they have websites and numbers, and you could work kind of reverse engineer and find out who those asset managers are, right? And then that is just literally being persistent. I have a client who has identified a property in Edgewater and it's in foreclosure. And I've literally called the law firm, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 times to figure out when they're going to schedule the sale. And that the girl that I've specifically talked to, because again, you ask, just like anything else, hey, I need your help. I'm looking to buy this property. I never said it was for a client. I just said it was for me. I'm looking to I've identified this property. It's in my neighborhood. I want to buy it. I would love to know about it. A lot of times they'll be like, no. But again, if you kind of, honey works better than vinegar, you sometimes could build relationships. Oh, what's your name? Oh, Kelly. Kelly, thank you. Right? Thank you so much for helping. Is there any way I could be on a list, when this property goes up for sale? And she literally would just tell me, call me in 2 weeks. Nothing's going to happen for 2 weeks. On Monday, I'll be here. And I literally would just check in with her. Right. And that property, my client got able to look at it before it hit the market, just hit the market, and he ended up passing on it. So that's one other way. REO and bank-owned properties, there are numerous, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with a lot of these websites. One, obviously the biggest one is Realty Track. That I used to pay for that especially during the recession. And that was a great way because they also do, I believe they also still do this, short sales and also foreclosures. So, and there's like so many, Home Path, Home Steps, Home Sales. I could send something out to you guys, an email with all the websites that we've used. There's auctions. The problem with auctions when you go to the county is that you generally have to have cash, right? And so that's where a lot of wholesalers will come up. Now, if you can build, like Jesse in particular, if you were to build like a group of investors and you have this, you can then show up to these auctions at the courthouse and buy these day of, right? I think it's generally they want like 20%, and then you have to have the entire payment within 24 hours. And then, one of the other things you could definitely do is, this was really big during the recession, is trying to build relationships with probate attorneys, right? And estate attorneys, because those guys are the ones that know about properties before they ever hit the market. They're the ones that are dealing with the estates, the executors or the administrators of these estates. And so they're great people to build relationships with. And one way to build a relationship with those people is literally to be like, can I set up a meeting? Can I take you out for coffee? Can, I come to your office? I mean, it's a little harder now with the pandemic. So that might have to wait, but I'm assuming, everyone who's on this call is predicting that there's going to be a higher number of foreclosures and short sales coming over the next probably 12 to 24 months. There's a moratorium now, but the short sale and the foreclosure process does take some time. So that's definitely one thing. If you can, once we get back to some sort of new normalcy, trying to continue to build relationship with these guys, or hey, you call them up and just say, hey, I would love to just pick your brain. I have an investment group. I'm looking to buy distressed properties. I'd love to buy you lunch, you know, if you don't want to meet, or Zoom or something like that. I'll just send you lunch, you know, it's like almost like bribery, but it's, again, you're just building relationships with these people to get to the forefront of their mind when they have opportunities. You know, and you never know. Obviously, I don't think there are some people I know who do kickbacks. Obviously, that's against the law for us. I've never done anything like that, but I think that is somewhat commonplace for some of my I have some of my friends who do wholesaling. They do those kind of things. But do you guys have any particular questions regarding distressed properties?
This might be a little off subject. Hi, Brian. Do you any familiarity with creative financing, or is that a totally separate class here?
You mean like seller financing?
Yeah, anything related to that, anything non-conventional.
I mean, you mean like hard money lenders, or like, because I would say generally there's probably not too many in distressed properties. I don't think there's too many sellers willing to do financing because they're not obviously in a position to. And then when it comes to hard money lenders, you know, I have some connections to some. I could definitely, you know, give you guys information. Generally, the cheapest hard money guys I know are somewhere between 10 and 12%, all the way up to 18%. Do you have some specific? When you say creative?
Yeah, no, I was thinking more along the lines of like seller financing, but that kind of deviates from what this subject. So
Yeah, I mean, generally what I've ever found is, you know, during the recession, I went from, you know, in 2007, I had never worked a foreclosure or a short sale, to probably 30% to 40% of my deals between 2008 and 2010 were foreclosures and short sales, where I actually went and got certified through CAR just to learn more about it. None of those people were in a position to do any kind of seller financing. Obviously, most of them were underwater for what it was worth. So I think it would be kind of hard to find seller financing on those. Now, seller financing can happen on other properties, especially I've seen it more often on multifamily investments, where there's an investor who has a number of properties and he just wants to liquidate. So if you give them, you know, a certain amount of money up front, you lock in that price, you know, and then within a year, you know, year to 3 years, actually come up with enough funds to finance it and get them out of the asset. But sorry if that doesn't help you, but.
no, that does. Yeah, and I was wondering, you know, I was looking to hear about more other than hard money lenders, you know, different ways to finance even these distressed properties, you know, whether it be lower down payments or other investors.
Yeah, I mean, you can create like a group of investors. So if you say you had like, it's really difficult. I feel like, so in particular, say if you take your network, right? Say 5 or 7 of your friends and just say, hey, I want to pull together some money, you know, and want to, as a down payment, and we finance it through a bank. There are ways to be creative like that, you know, and, you know, OPM other people's money. But I think in particular, if it's not a hard money lender, if it's not just a private like investor. So I've done some projects where I've literally just gone to one investor and he gave me all the money to do everything for the down payment of the property and the rehab. And then I just paid him a certain fee in return. There are those people out there, you know, they're not generally considered hard money guys, but they're kind of almost the same thing. So, any other questions regarding distressed properties? Have you, any of you guys, I mean, do any of you guys currently look for distressed properties? Do you guys, and/or, you know, want, like, work with in particular, like an investor who's looking for those?
I have been, and so I've just been mailing like letters to where they actually live, like looking in Remind to see if I can find like a phone number or email for the owner if they're like boarded up. But that's like in Markham.
Okay. Where's Markham?
It's like around Country Club Hills.
Okay. Okay. So if we don't have any questions regarding how to find more distressed properties, like again, I think when you're looking at distressed properties, at the end of the day, you know, whether it's distressed or it's just a neglected property, you know, you could potentially get just as good of a deal if it's a foreclosure or a short sale property than it is, you know, for a delinquent neglected property where there's either an absentee owner or just maybe an older person who just either can't afford to do the work or doesn't want to do the work anymore. But again, I think the most important thing is really either sending out mailings and or really is knocking on the door and just getting outside your comfort zone, right? Driving around, identifying those properties, and then literally just going knocking on those doors, you know, at least 10 times at different times of the day, at night, whatever it is. Again, it's a little trickier now because some people, you know, there was a property in River West where Dean on my team and I went and knocked on a couple doors because one property was for sale, and if we could put this property under contract, the lot next to it, the property, we could knock them both down and then build a 6-unit. And we knocked on that door, you know, a couple times. Dogs were there barking. We talked to the owner, 2 houses down. You know, it's like you create your own luck, you know, if that makes sense, by doing that. When it comes to tear downs, there's a multitude of reasons why you would want to, you know, do a tear down. Either you have limited housing inventory, right? You know, there's substantial prices and property values that are going up where it makes sense. There's demand for newer housing. And the cost to build new versus existing. Those are things you'd have to really think about. You know, generally, again, same thing. I was just at a client's house, client's 5-unit today, where he bought, it's in Wicker Park, he bought a 4-unit old brick house for $750,000. He's already dumped $300,000 into it and kind of gutted it and turned them into rental units. And I didn't help him, you know, identify the property. He did it all on his own. And I walked in this building today and it was a total dump. It was an old building. The walls were all curvy. The foundation was kind of sinking. He's got some legality issues with the non-conforming units. And I literally said to him, you know, I would have just knocked this thing down and built a 3-unit. And he was like, I probably should have, right? And so this is where an investor without a realtor potentially got himself into a bad situation where he's overextended and it's maybe not worth what it's, you know, what it could have been. So, you know, understanding a tear down, you know, a lot of times, so we're constantly, you know, this is something I'm going to actually be focusing more. I'm going to kind of get back into, I think, the mindset of building my developer business and also obviously doing my own developments. But a lot of times, you know, obviously we all know what a standard lot is, right? 25 by 125. So again, when you're looking for tear downs, what are you looking for, right? How do you know if there's actual value in the land versus what you could do with it? You know, honestly, anytime you find a property, just like a distressed property, what has outlived its life, right? So if you're sitting you know, if you're sitting and if you see like a car shop in the middle of a residential block, right? Or if you see a gas station in Wicker Park on a corner and it's surrounded by a bunch of like high-end houses just to this, you know, the north or the south of it, that might be a property where you could go to the owner if you have a right developer for that and it makes sense. So you have to constantly be looking at, you know, there's a lot in the city. It's unique, right? There's all these kind of commercial bars all over in the pockets of these neighborhoods. And there's also kind of, for instance, there's like one on Armitage and Sheffield. Right on Sheffield, there's an old body shop just south of Armitage there on the east side of the street. I have for years have gone in there and asked the seller if he wants to sell, right? And he's always said no. But there are plenty of opportunities out there because a lot of agents or a lot of people will just drive by and be like, oh yeah, that kind of looks out of sorts. But then they'll never actually get out of their car because they'll be like, oh, that guy probably doesn't want to sell or whatever it is. They just don't have the gumption for it. So really trying to figure out and identify those properties. You know, if one of the things that, if I could teach you anything from this class is really understanding zoning, right? So zoning is obviously going to tell you what you can and can't do with that particular lot in that neighborhood. The city of Chicago, for whatever reasons, very political and bureaucratic, is continuing to downzone the city. So, you know, in the residential class, right, you have like RS3, 3.5s, RT4s, a couple other RM5s. You know, the smaller ones, you could build smaller houses and then maximize your FAR. And FAR is obviously floor area ratios. So when you see a 2-flat on a block and it's surrounded by 3 units, 3-story, 4 stories, that generally can give you an idea, just a rough estimate of what you could do on the property, right? The way the city is working now, in particular in my neighborhood in Edgewater, my block is zoned RT4, but there are people calling for, and the alderman's calling for, downzoning it to an RS3, meaning you can only build like a 2-flat or a single family house, which decreases the value, right? They're trying to do that right now on the 606, right? All around there in Humboldt and Logan, they're trying to downzone around there to diminish the gentrification and the developers. So one of the things is always trying to identify that, you know, I have it saved on my phone, the zoning map, right? So I literally just could be wherever I'm driving, I pull over, I'll look at this project, look at this old dumpy house, what can I build on it? Or if there's a couple of projects that I've looked at over the years where it's like on busier streets, right? You might find a single story commercial space, right? But it's surrounded by, you know, residential on both sides. Those single stories most often can go up 3, 4, 5 stories based on that zoning. So if you could identify that and say, okay, go into the shop, be like, hey, is the owner here? And just say, hey, are you willing to sell? You know, and just start having those conversations. I was in the West Loop 5 years ago with a restaurant group, helping them trying to find a commercial space for them to open up their first restaurant. We walked in by on Washington there and Green Street. There's a car wash. You know where Parlor Pizza is in the West Loop there? There's a car wash just west of there. We walked in and literally asked the guy, because I was talking with my clients, and I'm like, this would be a perfect property, you know, because at the barn, the garage had those the barn attics, and they're going to do a German like beer garden. And we walked in there, and the guy, I straight up asked him like, hey, would you be willing to sell in the next like 3 to 6 months? And he was like, no. And then we started talking, and he kind of liked us, and he just like, well, what do you think you would offer me? You know? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll get back to you, you know, by the end of the day. Went back, did some research. We kind of came in with an offer of like 1.3 million. He said, no, I want 1.6 million. My guy said no. a year later, he sold it for $3 million. You know what I mean? So it's just like one of those things where it's just like, I would never have gotten that opportunity. We all kick ourselves in the butt now as we look back at that. Those guys should have bought it, because obviously the West Loop 5 years ago to what it is today, that car wash is still there, but it's already being planned. I think, I don't know if it's already been permitted, but I think they're going to build a tower. So it's just one of those things where never think that whatever idea you have is too crazy of an idea, right? Is constantly pursue those things and exhaust that. Have an architect. You know, if you guys wanted a referral for an architect or two, who you could call up and say, hey, same thing with, I have a great, Jim Banks is one of the best zoning attorneys in the city. It's and that's not Banks and Co, but I think it's Jim Banks attorney. You just Google them. They do something like 70% of all rezoning in the city. They are very well connected with the building department and the zoning department. His father used to sit on the board for the zoning department. So it's a very greasy, kind of oiled, you know, Chicago style law firm, but they're legit. And these are the kind of people where you literally call them up and be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And they'll look it up. They'll look at the zoning map, they'll look at this, and they'll tell you right there on the phone whether or not you could probably get something done. Right? So it's having a good architect, having a good zoning attorney, and then ultimately to try to find valuations is having a general contractor, a good general contractor. You know, when it comes to just like flipping properties, you know, the hardest thing that I try to find is, you know, I'm pretty good at evaluating, right? Properties. You know, what I would say, would anybody here, anyone here tell me what you think the average price per square foot to build new construction is right now in the city of Chicago? Not super high end, not like a $3-4 million house, but just kind of like, you know, $500,000-$600,000 condos, duplex up, duplex down, you know, kind of a 3 flat. Any guesses?
$500 a square foot.
Oh, maybe in LA. Yeah, for sure.
250 a square foot.
250 a square foot is accurate for like high end, right? So if you're building, so in Lincoln Park right now, if you were to try to build like a $4 million house, right? In a sense, for like a sales price of $4 million, you're probably buying that land for about $1.5 million. Your building costs are probably about $1.5 million. So you're into it for about 3, and then you're selling it for about 4.2 to 4.5. That developer is making $1.5 million on that super luxury single family house. That particular type of house is probably about $225 to $250 a square foot.
Is that all? Are you talking all in with soft costs and everything, or is that just hard costs?
Yeah, good
Okay.
question. That's hard. That's everything. So
So
when you
75.
Yeah. So what I'm finding right now when I talk to the general contractors and builders is if you're just knocking down a old like cottage, you know, or bungalow, and you're building a 3 unit, that's probably guys who are doing the most building right now, who are making the most money, are building it for about $150 to $175 a square foot. Those are the guys who are making the largest margins. Most developers don't have, most developers they don't have their own contractors. They sub out everything, right? The developers who actually have framers, you know, on salary and who have actual workers, those are the guys building for less because they're paying salaries. Everyone else is probably building between, you know, 160 and 180. So then you can literally look at a property and just say it's 175 is a general rule that I look at right now is 175. I will go and say, okay, what can I build on this property? So you look at a 25 by 125 lot, that's 3125. If it's RT4 zoning, you more or less, that I think the multiplier is 0.8 or no, 1.2 for RT4. So then you literally take 3125, multiply it times 1.2, and then that'll tell you what you could build on the lot. And then you divide that by 3 units if you're building a 3 unit. And that'll tell you generally how big those units could be, right? Minus some setbacks and stuff like that, right? If you're rehabbing, right? So a rehab price per square foot, a general rule that I've seen is probably somewhere between $80 and $100 a square foot. So that will tell you if you look into a house and the house is 2,800 square feet, you multiply that times 80, right? Whatever that cost is, add that, that cost onto your, on your purchase price. And then that'll give you a kind of a rough estimate of whether or not you could actually flip this property and make any money. So obviously one thing when you are doing tear downs and you are doing rehabs, what a lot of times I find that investors or rehabbers don't think about is actually the carrying costs, why, your holding costs. They don't actually put that into their underwriting, right? So they forget about the costs. So when we're doing this $80 a square foot for this rehab, what they don't think about is what's your carrying costs, what are your taxes, right? What do your permits cost you? What's your kind of your soft costs, not just your hard costs? How much is your plans for an architect cost? What are your financing costs? And when you really look at this, and this is where we kind of got into this conversation in the beginning, the financing part is not the hardest part to find. It's actually finding deals that actually make sense, right? Most developers I talk to, whether it's a single family house or it's like a 3 flat, which is the 2 common, probably most built products in the city, is they don't want to touch these projects if they're not making at least probably $250,000, 200, because the risk isn't, they're not putting up, they generally want to see 20 to 30% returns. One thing too, for you guys, if you're investing yourself, and I think this is where a lot of agents over the years, who are trying to flip properties themselves or trying to get investments, is obviously it's a benefit to be a realtor and you get that 2.5%. But in reality, I tell agents all the time, if you bring me a deal, I will give you my commission. It makes more sense on the long-term hold to literally give up 2.5% of that commission in order to get a better deal, right? That you tell me if you're an agent, we try to represent our clients the best of our abilities, but if you have a seller and you have an agent or an investor coming to you and saying, hey, I'll give you my commission, or you could keep the entire 5%, what natural tendencies do you think that agent's going to do? He's going to fight for you in order to get that deal done, right? Even if there is stiff competition, because most people aren't going to offer their commission, or most investors or most developers have realtors that they're working with who are going to eat that up. So in my opinion, it makes sense, if you have to, is to give that up. But I tell agents all the time who work with developers, hey man, just give me an opportunity. I'll give you that 2.5%. Now, obviously I'm not going to let them sell it, because that's what the benefit of being a realtor is. I want to sell my own products, but on the buy side, it makes sense for them. You guys have any questions?
Brian, how would you go about, I'm looking at we have a person that wants to sell in the area that owns 4 lots zoned B32. How do you value a property like that to like a highest and best use of that property?
Well, I first would say, so have you looked into what you can maximize on that lot for the zoning?
Well, yeah, it's zone B32. That's right now next to it. There's 4-story residential condos in that area. The guy thinks he wants $2 to $3 million for the property. I don't know what it's worth at all, but it's just beginning conversations with him.
Yeah. So one of the ways to help identify that, secondcityzoning.org,
Mhm.
I think, is a good website to always go for what can you do on zoning. Right, these guys, I think they're a bunch of attorneys who created this. And it kind of helps identify what setbacks and specifications that you have for the property. You know, the FAR on that is unbelievable. So, you know, for a B32, that's shopping centers, large stores, retail storefronts, apartments, you know, and so obviously mixed use. I would probably go about that is talking to an architect, figure out, and your zoning department, your zoning guy is, can you upzone it, right? Because if for some whatever reason, if he could somehow upzone that, then if he's willing to put the money in and upzone it, then you could sell it to, instead of selling it to a smaller developer, now you're selling it to like LG, right? You're selling it to Sterling Bay. You know, you're selling it to these developers who, instead of building 3 and 4 stories, they could build 7 and 8 stories. So the valuation for him, you know, most often it's obviously it's on a busy street, you said, with the B32.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Is it a corner lot?
It's a corner lot, right?
Yeah, depending on that, I would talk to an architect, verify what you could do. If you want a referral for an architect, I could send you one. That is just, you know, really accomplished architect who's been around. And then go from there and talk to him, and then maybe have a conversation with the zoning. When you look at the zoning map, if you, wherever this property is, have you looked up the zoning map on it, Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah. Has there been any zoning changes around there?
No, well, there's been a few that are, looks like there's some variances or waivers or whatever they call it in the area, but for the most part, no.
Okay. So most likely you won't get one, right? Because it's all about precedent, right? If a precedent has been established on the block, then that's something that the city will then, or the zoning attorney will reflect and leverage and anchor. But if you don't have one, that's kind of harder to do. So I would just talk to an architect. Hey, what's the max I could do here? And from there, evaluate it, reverse engineer and say, okay, if we build this many units, you know, then you have to identify whether you're going to keep those as like, what makes more sense? Is it apartments or are they condos, right?
I should take that back. There are C12s and C13s that have been changed across the street, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just changed a year and a half ago some C1 twos to C2, I think. And so that was a unique zoning. It was an interior residential street that actually had C zoning. So I was actually able to get all these buildings on that all the buildings on that street were only 2 stories, and I was able to build a 3-story condos. And now that there's that precedent in the neighborhood, now I could go and rezone. If I could get any of those sellers to sell to me, I will then continue to build 3 flats because I now have a property that the city was already approved. So I would figure out what makes more valuation right now. Obviously rentals are kind of getting crushed, but I think the appetite's still there. Is really try to figure out, it's a lot of work, right? To identify that. But I would figure out whether or not you have, what makes more sense. Build out, you said you have 4 city lots. So that's probably, I think that's 4 stories. A B32.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've looked it up, but I could look it up. But area ratio. So if that's 4 units, that's 16, you know, residential units and then 4 commercial spaces. And then you just literally have to maybe talk with the architect and say, hey, what can we do, and have a conversation. What's going to be most valuable for your seller is if he completely understands what you can and can't do. Right? Because
Right.
anytime what a developer and what an investor hopes is that the seller doesn't know what he has, right? But when you're representing a seller and these big projects and these properties, is doing your due diligence and spending a little money up front is by far, if your client has to spend, say 10 grand to 15 grand to work with an architect to figure out what he could do, well worth his time and effort, because then maybe you don't go and actually hire an architect and do all the drawings and all the plans and have it permit ready. But at least you have, an understanding of what you can and can't do. So when you are trying to talk to developers, you help guide them, and that'll give them confidence, because most developers ideally want to have like dirt ready, right? So they want to make sure that they don't have to do any variances, they don't have to do any rezoning. That will help them have peace about moving forward with a project. I've been in too many situations where I have these unbelievable opportunities and they're almost too ambiguous of what we can and can't do. And then developers are just like, come back to me when you have more information. I like it. And we have an idea of what we could do, but we don't totally know because we haven't really engaged an architect and a zoning attorney. But Jeff, we could have more of a conversation offline if you want.
That sounds great.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Is there something specific that I haven't addressed that somebody has a thought on besides creative financing? Okay. Well, if there's any more questions, guys, if you come across a property or if you come across a situation where you're kind of like, hey, I don't know what to do here, or what are your thoughts on it? Feel free to text me, call me, drop me an email. And if I could help direct you or help guide you, more than happy to. But if there's no other questions, hope you guys found this somewhat helpful, and good luck with trying to figure out, doing flips and stuff like that. If you guys need some connections to general contractors or any kind of trades in particular, having a good general contractor that is willing and able to come and, meet you at properties and do the due diligence is well worth trying to establish that. Obviously, contractors are super busy right now. So, but they ultimately are looking for building. They also are business owners, and they too want to find long-term relationships that'll be mutual beneficial. So I've had a couple of GCs where I've literally had the conversation, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. I want to build a development company. I want to continue to buy and flip properties. I'm looking for a general contractor I could trust and build a relationship and have a win-win relationship. And that's generally, if they say, oh, yeah, I don't know, I'm really busy, then just move on to the next guy. All right, guys, take care. Have a great day. Good luck. Reach out to me if you guys need anything.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, take care, guys.
Thank you, Brian.